Hi, we'll just get started right now. Thank you everyone for showing up on a Friday morning. I know some people are working from home because July 4th is coming up, but I really appreciate you guys being here. My name is Christine Hong. I am part of the International Engineering Operations team. We help to set up and expand our engineering centers worldwide, but this has nothing to do with my job. I just know Adrian, and he is a guy who is so passionate about what he does, and he has a big heart. I thought he would be a fresh breath of air for Googlers and an inspiration to all of us. A little bit about Adrian. He is Executive Director of Liberty in North Korea, or LINK. He was recently arrested by the Chinese authorities and jailed in 2006 for his work in helping North Korean refugees escape to freedom. And we have lunch scheduled at Charlie's. You'll see a table reserved under LINK, and we'll get started. Here's LINK. Here's Adrian.
Thanks. Okay. Hello, and thanks for, thank you for taking time out of your day to come hear me speak and learn a little bit more about this issue. It's probably more to hear about the issue than me. Before we start, I'd just like to show a short clip that will, it's almost a compilation of recent news and just kind of footage surrounding the North Korea crisis. But I will have to find the DVD player. Okay. But again, my name is Adrian Hong. I'm from San Diego, but I'm currently stationed out in Washington, D.C. I travel a lot, but that's where our office is. And our organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-religious, non-ethnic group that is focused, I guess, number one priority is on North Korean human rights. And I'll get a little bit more into what that means here in a second.
The children were starving, dying. They were literally dying under my hand because there was no food.
Operation Drop Dead here, and millions are starving in North Korea. Tons are in prisoner camps. We gotta make it known. People don't care here. That's why we gotta do dramatic things like this to get people to pay attention to what's really going on in the world. That there are people only 30 kilometers north of here suffering and dying and starving and in prison for no reason. They have no human rights. And no one cares, and no one seems to care. So we have to go to these kind of measures to show people, make people care.
한국 뛰다 잡힌 것도 사람 치고 안에 있습니다. 지금 막 못했는데 심한 걸 죽이기까지 했다.
So again, my name is Adrian Hong. I'm here speaking on behalf of a group called Liberty in North Korea, or LINK for short. And I'm going to go into a little bit of background initially on what exactly we mean by North Korean human rights. How many of you were aware of, I guess, the human rights crisis in North Korea before you got the email about this event? Okay, so there's a good amount of penetration here. How many of you were aware that there were concentration camps in North Korea? Okay, great. Wow, we have a very socially conscientious group. Okay. As we all know, burned into our collective memory is the memory of the Holocaust, right? All the way as early as elementary school and middle school, when we're reading about the Diary of Anne Frank and watching Schindler's List, we have a very strong collective memory of what happened in Nazi Germany and during the Axis powers. And 6 million Jews died, 4 to 5 million dissidents and criminals, not criminals, but criminals according to their state, and other people that were considered undesirable by the Nazis were executed, were killed in what is, I think, one of the darkest times of the last century. After this happened, there was a lot of promises made by individuals and governments around the world. Never again was the phrase that was repeated over and over again. We can never again have a situation where any country or group can get away with destroying an entire people based on their ethnicity, their race, religion, or political views. And the sad truth of it is, despite all those bold promises, we have, as you're well aware, the situation in Darfur today. We had Rwanda about 10 years ago. And actually we now have North Korea as well. So I'm going to get a little bit into the background here. North Korea currently has about 23 million people in its country. Actually closer to 24 now as of last year. It is a communist totalitarian state, which is weird because it's the only communist dynasty in history where the father has passed it on to the son. And it's essentially, it's not even, I think, a pure communist state. It's essentially a cult. It's a religion based around the founder, Kim Il-sung, who has passed away about 10 years ago, but is still the titular leader of the country. And it's a country that is very different from everything else, I think, in the history of the world. And I'll get into a little bit more about the details there. And Kim Jong-il, as you're all aware, and you're all familiar from Team America World Police, is now the current leader, and he is lonely. This is the Korean War that split the Korean peninsula into two. So the south, you have a prosperous, democratic, capitalist society. And in fact, if you know any Koreans or Korean Americans, we all trace our heritage from the south, at least one generation back. Because if you're from North Korea, you cannot get out. It's just a fact of the matter. And this was Kim Il-sung, of course, the leader of North Korea. Sorry, it's just gratuitous. I should have taken that out. That's Kim Jong-il, the current leader, with Jiang Zemin, the last president of China. This is the border between North and South Korea, the most heavily fortified border in the world. I think Bill Clinton, when he was president, visited the border and said it is the scariest place on earth. There are huge amounts of troop concentrations pointed at each other between South and North Korea. And technically, the two Koreas, as well as the US and these other countries, are still at war. It's only an armistice. It's technically a ceasefire. They are not at peace. In fact, the United States doesn't even recognize North Korea and vice versa as legitimate countries. In the last 10, 15 years, about 2 to 3 million North Koreans died. North Korea went through a series of famines and floods from 94 to 96. But the floods and famines in and of themselves were not the problem. At the time of the floods and famine, North Korea received the most international aid of all the countries in the world, a lot of it from the United States. They had enough food, clearly had enough food to feed its people, but did not. In fact, what they did is, since they got international aid, they said, okay, well, let's not feed the people with what we have to begin with. Let's sell it on the black market. Let's feed the military. Let's do other things with that aid. In fact, there are aid bags from the Red Cross or things like that that say gift of the American people, gift of the Japanese people, gift of the EU that have shown up on black markets in Russia and China. Also, there have been bags of heroin, which North Korea exports, put into aid bags marked by the Red Cross and used to smuggle out. And so this is a country that clearly does not consider its people as a vested interest. Kim Jong-un has been quoted saying that only 10% of its country has to survive. Only 10% has to survive for it to be considered a successful state. So if you're going with that standard, they're not doing so badly right now. But an estimated 10% of North Korea did perish in the last 10, 15 years. About 13 million of all 24 million people in North Korea are malnourished. It's a medical state that essentially you cannot recover from chronic malnourishment. You cannot. If you're a child from between the ages of maybe 0 and 5, when you're first born, you need to get regular food, regular breast milk nutrition. Otherwise, you will get stunted permanently, physically in terms of your growth, in terms of your height, your weight, and also mentally. You will get mental retardation because you are not able to eat functionally when you're a child. And 13 million of North Korea's population is currently like that. The average ration is 250 grams, which is a minuscule, minuscule amount. And most of the people actually don't even get that ration. The World Food Program supported 6.5 million people in North Korea up until about a year ago when they got kicked out. And then now they brought back in and they feed 1.2 million people, which means, all these statistics basically, what it means is a lot of people are starving in North Korea. 3 times as many people starved in North Korea in the last 10 years than did in the Ethiopian and Somalian famine. And so this is a tremendous crisis that very few people are aware of, and the biggest distinction with this crisis is that it's man-made. It is not a result directly of a huge, a tidal wave or a flood or an earthquake or a natural disaster. It is inherently man-made, and that is why I think it warrants our attention a little bit more. A 7-year-old North Korean child is 105 centimeters metric, and a 7-year-old South Korean child is 125 centimeters. That's the average height between the two countries. Now, these two countries were not separated until about 1950. They were one country for 5,000 years. So they're the same DNA, the same genetic makeup, but that's the height difference on average, just at 7-year-olds. Once you get older, the average height for the North Korean military is around 5 feet solid for the military. And even at the DMZ levels, you can see the major distinctions between South Korean soldiers and American soldiers as opposed to North Korean soldiers. In terms of health, there is no public health infrastructure whatsoever. The hospitals are overrun. There's no electricity going throughout the country. There's a lack of clean water, and there's a huge, huge epidemic crisis with typhoid, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, and diseases like dysentery. Things that, did anyone play Oregon Trail when they were in elementary school? You have died of dysentery. That still happens in North Korea. Weakened immune systems cause deaths from the common cold because your system cannot fight it off. Something we get over with a night's sleep and Dimetap, or Robitussin if you don't like Dimetap. It kills people in North Korea. They die from this because there's a weakened immune system because they don't get basic food every day. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, there is stunted growth and severe brain damage in a whole generation of North Korean children. So that is essentially the context, the background of the situation in North Korea, without even getting into the human rights situation. Already, we're starting off from severely malnourished population, no medical care and public health situation, and everybody inherently is born and raised with stunted immune systems and just health in general. This is, on the right, you see there are 2 North Korean refugees. They're aged 21 and 22 years old. On the left, that's myself. So those 2 gentlemen are very, very, very small for their age. In fact, they were joking around. They looked like hobbits, and they were joking around about that. But that's the result of a generation of physical stunting. This is actually in one of our underground shelters in China that I'll get into. In North Korea, the only information that you get from anywhere is from the government directly. Outside radio, news, television, print media is all banned, which means the only source of information, whether it's about history, current affairs, or politics, is from Kim Jong-un and the leaders. If you are caught reading or listening to outside radio, whether it's South Korean or Russian or Chinese or American, if you're caught reading outside magazines and newspapers, if you're caught changing the wiring on your television or radio so you can get outside broadcasts, you are sent to a concentration camp. That is the reality of what's happening in North Korea. So you have a whole generation. Back when we were talking about not the Soviet Union and the Cold War, you had Eastern Europe and you had the Soviet bloc where there was an amount of propaganda and brainwashing involved. But you could always still turn the channel and listen to Voice of America, or Radio Free Europe, or BBC, and you could get an alternative view, and you could get a sense for what was really happening behind the propaganda. Not to mention the additional fact that many of the people that were living during Stalin's reign and after that had already been born and raised before that happened, so they knew that the outside world was not really like that, and they bought into the propaganda just for appearance's sake. In North Korea, it's been there for over 50 years. You have people that are born and raised in the system and know nothing else. So when you're talking about helping North Korea, or reunifying with North Korea, as the South Koreans say, or engaging North Korea, you're dealing with 23 million people that don't know what the real world is like. It's literally like unplugging from the Matrix. And it sounds like a corny analogy, but it literally is that bad, where you have people come out and they're shocked that there's cars everywhere in America, or they're shocked that South Korea is not a victim of nuclear holocaust, or they're shocked that Americans don't have horns, which actually North Korean children's textbooks have Americans with horns and tails with pitchforks, believe it or not. That's how far the propaganda has gone. And the fact that you have full-grown adults believing that and getting shocked that that's not the case says a lot about their mental condition. There are no freedoms of speech, religion, assembly, movement, anything. Every fundamental freedom that exists in the world, in this country in particular, every fundamental freedom that is guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights does not exist in North Korea. You cannot express, even saying, today's rations were not so great, is enough to get you to a concentration camp. In the past, we've had refugees testify that they had been, for example, there was a magazine with a picture of Kim Jong-il, and they put a cup down on it, and the condensation left a ring. That got them sent to a camp. Another woman heard a South Korean pop song, I don't know where she heard it. She heard it somewhere and started whistling it to her friends. Her 3 friends got sent to a mid-level labor detention camp, and she was sent to a concentration camp. The other thing that's severe about North Korea's system, there's about 250,000 in the concentration camps now. And for example, if Christine were to commit a crime today, and she said, oh, you know what, today's lunch didn't really taste that good, that is interpreted as being the state is not good. The country is not good. The leadership has failed us in one way or another. And it's supposed to be a socialist paradise. When she says that, she goes to concentration camps. But Kim Il-sung has a principle that says 3 generations must be punished for every crime to wipe out the seed of dissent, which means her children and her children's children, or her parents and her children, are all sent with her. North Korea is the only country in the last 300 years that criminalizes children for political crimes. Mao, Hitler, Stalin, they all did not throw children into political camps. They did it for ethnic reasons, but other things, but for actions, they did not. If you're a 2nd grader and you go, you know what, it's kind of weird that Kim Jong-il gets all of our food and money and we get nothing. I mean, you're a 2nd grader, you're precocious to say what's on your mind. You will go to a camp and you will send your parents and relatives with you. There's a gentleman named Hwang Jung-yup who's over 80 years old. He was the highest ranking North Korean defector ever to leave that country. He defected through Beijing and ended up in Seoul. He lives essentially under house arrest in Seoul now. When he defected, 70 households, that means 70 families that were somehow related to him, were all sent to concentration camps. And so that is the impact of how it's like in North Korea. When you meet any North Korean diplomats, if you're ever so fortunate or not, they're always traveling in 2s, and they never have their family with them. And the reason for that, obviously, is so they can keep each other in check, and so that they don't defect. Their families are essentially held hostage. The same thing goes for Olympic athletes, for folks that travel abroad for conferences and governmental relations and things of that nature. This is the map of the network of North Korean concentration camps that we know of. And many of these are accessible by our favorite platform, Google Earth, as well. In fact, that's been a tremendous tool in helping spread awareness about these issues. And these are just the known major camps. Back during the Holocaust, the excuse a lot of people made was that we did not know, that it was outlandish and ridiculous that human beings are capable of such things. Gas chambers, human experimentation, Zyklon B, that they could not conceive of a government institutionalizing and turning their energies to creating an infrastructure to kill people in that huge number. To have train lines going to concentration camps, to have guards whose sole function was to kill people the fastest, to recycle human hair, human bones, to remake goods for the war movement. That was ridiculous and inconceivable for the outside world. And then obviously at the time, a lot of government officials actually knew this to be true. But after the war ended, the world was stunned. After the war ended, people were in shock. The Allied troops that liberated Dachau and Auschwitz were in shock. They could not believe that human beings were capable of such, and I know evil's overused these days, but it is evil. Today we have unbelievable amounts of proof. 11,000 refugees have come to South Korea, among them prison guards and prison administrators, people that used to run these camps that say, this is how many people I had in my camp. This is the product that we were forcing them to make. This is how many public executions we had a week. They've labeled each building to tell us what each building was used for. We know what time they wake up, what songs they're forced to sing, how many steps they have to take around the building when they're punished, and what the names of the guards are. We know that much detail, and we have satellite pictures of all of the camps in North Korea. That's the difference between today and maybe 1935 or 1940. We have the awareness. It's just a matter of a lack of will or political will to make a difference about this. In the camps in North Korea and in general, there is a system of public execution. If you commit a crime against the state that's warranted bad enough to make an example of you, say you try to escape from a concentration camp, say you try to lead an uprising, or say you just say one day, I am tired of a forced military draft. The military draft in North Korea is over 10 years. 10 years. At 17, you go in for 10 years or more. If you complain, you're tied up to a stake, you're beaten up, and they fill your mouth with rocks. Does anybody know why that might be? I'm sorry? Close. They're already beaten up tremendously, but I mean, they're filled with rocks so they can't speak. Because if you're about to get shot and publicly executed, you have nothing to lose at that point. You're going to speak your mind and say, this government sucks, or our situation is not right, this is not inherently morally, ethically right. So they fill their mouth with rocks, and then they tie them to a post and they publicly execute them. We actually have videos, I have some available if you want to see it, of public executions in North Korea. The other thing they do in concentration camps is that they make the family of the victim or the accused come up and stone him to death before they shoot him. And they make every single person in the concentration camp come up, pick up a rock, and throw it at the guy in order to say, we agree with the state, you have committed a crime, we are purging you from our society. If you do not, you will be strung up next to him. That is the way North Korea has created the system. You're either with them or against them, and if you're against them, you die. There are no champions speaking on their behalf. There's no underground dissident movement. There's no revolution. There are no outside governments or agencies or the UN speaking out for them or saying, today, 4 more people were executed. Last week, 200 people died in concentration camps. It's just not there. There are forced rapes and abortions in these camps. In particular, when women come back from China, and I'll get into why they end up in China to begin with, if they come back pregnant, they're assumed to be a child of mixed race, of mixed heritage, probably with Chinese blood. And North Korea's official state policy, believe it or not, is of a pure Korean race, where they say, if you are a child of mixed heritage, we will kill you. If a woman comes back pregnant from China, they will forcibly abort the baby. And it's not, in a hospital and sanitary conditions, they use a syringe filled with salt water. And if that doesn't work, they kick the woman's stomach until the baby dies. And if that doesn't work, they wait till the baby is born, put it in a box, and let it die out of exposure. That's the way they do this, on a weekly basis in North Korea. In fact, when Hines Ward, if you're familiar with the Pittsburgh Steelers MVP for the Super Bowl, when he won the Super Bowl, South Korea was fanatical about him. They said, look, he's so great, he's one of our sons, and we're so proud of him. North Korea actually went as far as to issue a public statement that said that they condemn South Korea's love affair with mixed race, and that what did they say? 1 drop of mixed race in the Han River will not dilute 5,000 years of racial purity. The government issued a statement saying this. That's the kind of system we're dealing with. It's unreal. It's something we watch in movies or we see in the History Channel. It's happening right now in 2007. Infanticide, as I mentioned earlier, is widespread in that country. Hot boxes. This is basically, it's literally a box just the size of a human body where you crouch down. And you cannot move, and it's just in the sun, and you bake there forever. They leave you out there for weeks if you do anything that's seen as any hint of rebellion when you're in a concentration camp. Defectors have testified that they would sit in these boxes for weeks, burning their flesh because obviously they can't move and it's made of metal. And any bugs and caterpillars and rats that would scurry by, they would grab and eat, and that would be the only way they could survive. Gas chambers. There are strong allegations of gas chambers in North Korea. Several defectors that have left have actually brought out paperwork detailing the details of glass chambers that are made of glass so that scientists can study what effect the gas has on families that are put in there together, for example. One story, personal anecdote that I have, we were with a bunch of defectors that came to Washington, D.C., and we were helping them tell their stories. And they were all arm wrestling each other. They were like children. They were all arm wrestling each other. And then one guy just was destroying everybody else, hands down, easily. And then he said, the reason I'm so strong on my right hand is that when I was a child, they forced us to cut down wood every day, firewood. He grew up in a concentration camp, essentially. So his right arm was incredibly strong because he would have to cut wood all of his life. There was another defector that's now 16 years old that is now in the United States. We brought him out ourselves. He pointed out on Google Maps a cultural center, a museum, and a school that he went to, his house. He pointed out his house. And then he told us a huge complex, a factory down the street from his school was built by them in elementary school. Every day, they wouldn't study math or science or history. They would walk out and march down the street and dig in coal mines every day at the age of 10 and 12. And they had to literally build this camp. That's the way the society has been in North Korea. At the camp, I witnessed public executions, forced labor, and other inhumane atrocities. A new prisoner in the North Korean political prisoner camps is taught not to consider themselves as human beings. The prisoners cannot complain of beatings or even murders. Even the children are subject to forced labor, and about 1/3 of them die of malnutrition and heavy labor. I also suffered from malnutrition after being imprisoned, lacking even the strength to walk. I witnessed a whole family being tested on suffocating gas and dying in the gas chamber. The parents, son, and a daughter. The parents were vomiting and dying, but till the very last moment, they tried to save the kids by doing mouth-to-mouth breathing. Later, in 10 years or in 60, it will surely turn out that quite a lot was known in 2004, or now 2007, about the camps of North Korea. It will turn out that information collected by various human rights groups, South Korean churches, oddball journalists, and spies added up to a damning and largely accurate picture of an evil regime. It will turn out that there were things that could have been done, approaches the South Korean government might have made, diplomatic channels the US government might have opened, pressure the Chinese might have applied. Historians in Asia, Europe, and here will finger various institutions just as we do now and demand that they justify their past actions. And no one will be able to understand how it was possible that we knew of the existence of the gas chambers but failed to act. And again, these are more satellite pictures of the camps. This is Yodok camp, which is by far the most notorious, the Auschwitz basically, of North Korea. And again, the 250,000 people in there now and the 500,000 that died in the last 30 years, they've committed no crime. These are not criminals, murderers, rapists, arsonists. These are basically citizens that have expressed a little bit of discontent or wanted to practice Buddhism or any religion outside of what the state has practiced. Or one day did not show up to re-education class. Every week, every person in North Korea has to get in their little small group. The whole country is regimented into small groups. And you have to criticize each other, mutual criticism sessions, where you tell the other person what you did wrong that week against the state, and he corrects you and says, comrade so-and-so, the dear leader would not like it if you did this, back and forth. Everybody is an informant in that country. Everybody is an informant. In fact, if you don't report on someone else's crimes or someone else's dissent, you will also go to a concentration camp. So it's very well known in that country that these are places from where you cannot return. There are about 400,000 North Korean refugees hiding in China and other countries. If you were in North Korea today, most likely you would want to leave unless you're one of the military elites or the political elites. And so they obviously try to leave across the border into China. Now, the border between China and North Korea is a river. At some points, it's no wider than from here to that door over there. And at some points, it's only up to knee height. So the average person can probably sneak out. Every 50 meters along that border, if you ever visit there, you'll see them. There are little bunkers of wood with North Korean soldiers sitting there pointing at China. For any refugees that might run across, they literally shoot them in the back and that's it. If the Chinese authorities will catch you, they will send them back to North Korea. North Korea's constitution, their actual law, criminalizes leaving the country without permission. That's a UN universal human right to freedom of movement. But in North Korea, you cannot leave without permission. You can't even leave your hometown. If you run out of food or your electricity doesn't work or there's no clean water, you will die. If you know for a fact the town next door, literally if it's 50 meters away, if the border's right there, you cannot go over and get food or water. It's criminalized. You need a permit, an actual permit from the government to leave your town. To leave the country is treason. No matter why you leave, if you accidentally got drunk and stumbled over, if you were hungry, if your little sister ran across and you went back to get her, or if you were trying to defect, whatever your reasoning was, if you leave that country, you've committed treason, and it's punishable by death in that country. Which means we have about 500,000 North Koreans running around in the underground in China and Russia and these other countries, Thailand, Vietnam, that are in hiding from their authorities. And China actually in particular hunts them down and sends them back to North Korea. Amnesty International has reported that they're wired through their collarbones. Because they can't afford handcuffs, they literally wire them through their collarbones, put them in trucks and send them back. Other refugees have told us that they literally put barbed wire through their palms and then tie them. And we've had refugees show us their scars here in their hands. And they actually mark them physically so they know how many times they've been caught. That's the reality of what's happening in that border there at this moment. These refugees that I mentioned are repatriated to severe punishment. An estimated 70 to 90% of the women among these refugees are sexually trafficked. They're sold on the black market, sometimes for as little as $100. Refugees have testified that they've been sold several times over. If you're younger and more attractive, you're sold for a higher rate. If you're older and less attractive, you're sold for less. And they basically use them and discard them. Refugees have told us that they got into a cab. They crossed into China somehow. They got into a cab and they said, I want to go to the embassy, or I want to go to this church, or I want to go to my relative's house. A cab driver picked up their accent, realized they were North Korean, drove them to a warehouse and sold her off. What do you do at that point? You can't speak to the language. You can't go to the police because they'll send you back. There's no choice. There's no solution at that point. There are other situations where they go into a restaurant and the restaurant pretends to take them in and says, you know what, we'll take care of you. Have some soup, get some rest. In the morning, we'll take you to a church and they'll protect you. The soup was drugged. They wake up tied to a basement, tied to a pole in the basement. That is the reality of what's happening to over 70% of these women out there. So when we talk about sex trafficking, when we talk about human rights violations, when we talk about concentration camps, it is all happening in North Korea today to a tremendous, tremendous degree. Among these, many of the children are also trafficked. If you go out there, if you go to, for example, the train station in northeastern China, you'll get swarmed by little kids coming up to your waist asking for money. Every now and then, the Chinese government cracks down and sends them all back to North Korea as per their arrangement, and where they're put into camps or severely, severely punished for what they've done. Another problem we have is this. Well, first of all, does anyone know why? There's a huge shortage of females in northeastern China. Females of marriageable age. Does anyone know why that is?
Sex-selective abortions.
Yes. The one-child policy has resulted in sex-selective abortions, feticide, and infanticide. So basically, as of 2010, China will be short by an estimated 30 million females. 30 million females. I mean, 30 million guys are going to be needing wives. And so as a result, this black market trafficking market has created where you're bringing in people from Thailand, from Burma, but also in huge numbers from North Korea. Now, I'm not saying all these unions between Chinese males and North Korean females are North Korean males and Chinese females are loveless and they're all trafficking. That's not the case. There are many situations that we know of personally even where a Chinese male has been very, very noble and just a good guy, and they fall in love and they have children. The problem with that is even if they've legitimately married with a Chinese citizen, that woman is illegal for life. Even if they have a child and the child's father is a legitimate Chinese citizen, he is illegal for life. He cannot go to school, he cannot get a job, and he cannot get medical care. There is no life whatsoever in that country. If you're 1 or 2 years old, that's okay. You can sit at home, play with your mother. If you're 5, 6, you need to go to school. If you're 10, 12, or 18, you need to get a job and get out of the house. There's a whole underclass in China, several 100,000 of these people that cannot move, cannot leave their homes, cannot do anything at all. And so to address this, Link has actually opened up about 50 underground shelters throughout the region. Or we have our staff members that go in there and literally hide refugees, just like you would imagine in Anne Frank's attic under the bookcase. And they bounce around different shelters whenever one gets raided. That's the only solution we can think of outside of having the Chinese government change their policy. And I'm sure we're all aware here of how difficult that is to do. The International Convention on Refugees defines a refugee as a person who is outside his or her country of nationality or habitual residence, has a well-founded fear of persecution because of his or her race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, and is unable or unwilling to avail himself or herself of the protection of that country or return there for fear of persecution. All this fancy talk basically means you cannot go back to your home country because you will be killed or punished. All of these refugees in China effectively fall under that category. And so the UNHCR, which is a UN agency that deals with refugees, should, by all rights, go into China, find these people, give them certificates and say they're refugees, and protect them from repatriation to North Korea. It does not. Not whatsoever. There is no agency in the world that is protecting North Korean refugees right now. There are limited amounts that have escaped, whether they crossed on foot all the way to Mongolia or Thailand or other countries that might let them out, or somehow they've gotten the guts to jump a fence into an embassy, like the Spanish embassy, and ask the Spanish to send them to the US or to South Korea. By and large, most of these people are just rotting away in basements. They cannot do anything because the Chinese government will hunt them down, especially in advance of the 2008 Olympics, when it's China's time to shine on the world stage. So these people are literally being chased down, being hunted, and sent back in large numbers at the moment. This is the border between China and North Korea. If you look here, this tiny little bit of water, that's the river. That's the Tumen River. So you can imagine how easy it is for a refugee that's living across the river and starving or being persecuted to cross over into China. And China to them is a whole new world. It's shocking when they hit China. They see the amount of cars and television and media, the fact that you have more than one channel on TV, the fact that you have more than one type of cheese in a supermarket. I mean, it's shocking to them. They're stuck in a time warp. So the transition from there to South Korea is huge. And then from there to the United States is tremendous. It's life-changing for them. But 400,000 of these people are living out there right now. Back before the Civil War in this country, we had something called the Fugitive Slave Act. Does anyone know what that is? Yes? Feels like class. Okay, sure. He does know. Essentially, the northern states were free. The southern states held slaves. And so many slaves escaped from their plantations to the north, to places like Connecticut and New Jersey, and declared their freedom that the southern states rebelled and said, we want you to pass Fugitive Slave Acts, which basically said, if a slave would escape to the north, we will send them right back to where they came from. And what would happen when they got sent back? They would be tortured, they would be raped, or they would be killed. It was not illegal to kill your slave at that time. It's a dark chapter in American history. It's a time when we compromised our morality for the sake of political stability, I would say. And it's happening again. This is just exactly what South Korea, what China, what a lot of these countries are doing. They are sending back refugees or taking in only minimal amounts and discouraging them from coming for the sake of good diplomatic relations with North Korea. This is a detention center in China. This picture was taken by myself, and I'm not particularly ninja or CIA trained. Literally, we just went up there and took a picture. That's how real and accessible this is. This is where they process North Korean refugees before they're sent back to North Korea proper. We know for a fact that several people have died there because we've counted the number that have gone in, and fewer numbers have come out. In fact, the mother of one of our activists in China also perished here. This is a North Korean defector who was formerly a member of Kim Jong-il's Joy Team. Kim Jong-il, and this sounds ridiculous, has a squad of about 2,000 women. They're split up into 3 categories: happiness, satisfaction, and Joy Team. They make up singers, dancers, gymnasts, and also people that perform, obviously. It's essentially his personal harem. And she escaped when she was on the Pyongyang's official gymnastics team, and she came out to testify at the United States about this. We've had defectors testify in the Senate. This woman on the upper left, she is the one that sung a South Korean pop song and got sent to a prison camp for whistling a South Korean pop song. These people have testified in agencies throughout the world, at the US Senate, the House of Representatives, the United Nations, the European Union, and nothing is being done for them. Nothing at all. And I can say that very clearly, there's nothing being done for these people. So Link initially started as a reaction to this. When you hear about these things, your first reaction is, wow, that really sucks. Your second reaction is, well, someone must be doing something for this, so I'll just help them. That's how we started, and we discovered that nobody was doing anything about this. And if they were using human rights as a means to an end. And we felt that it needed to be a movement purely for the sake of human rights. So we started out in the typical amateur grassroots way. We had some concerts for them, benefit concerts. We had protests. We had defectors speak. This is outside the Chinese embassy. There's a Chinese mission, actually, in New York to the UN. And they usually shut down and lock up and kick us out when that happens. We had artists starting to prepare art for this cause and major forums where we had defectors speak about their experiences all over the country. And since then, we've actually broached out to 100 chapters worldwide, all the way in Australia, South Korea, EU countries, and throughout the United States and Canada. In the last 3 years, we've actually developed a great deal beyond that to where we got a little bit more sophisticated. About a third of what we do is based on advocacy, a third of it is based on awareness, and a third of it is on underground work. And I'll get into that in a minute. This is a protest we did in front of the South Korean UN mission. Does anyone have a question why we would do that in front of the South Korean mission? After all, it is a capitalist free society. They are not actively running concentration camps. The reasoning for this is that South Korea's government has instituted something called the Sunshine Policy, where they give unconditional amounts of aid to North Korea and don't ask where it goes. If you give cash up to billions of dollars, if you give huge amounts of food, grain, medicine to North Korea and don't ask them who's getting it, can we monitor the food, obviously they're going to be using it for illegitimate means. Beyond that, the South Korean government has censored defectors from speaking out publicly. They've actively worked to discourage groups like ours from speaking publicly in South Korea and prevented giving visas to defectors that wanted to go leave the country to testify about this. In other words, the South Korean government is clamping down on human rights dialogue to prevent bad relations with North Korea. And so we had a protest. This sign says 22 million is more important than Tokdo. Tokdo is an island between Korea and Japan. It's uninhabited. It's maybe the size of Googleplex. And Japan and South Korea have basically declared diplomatic war against each other over an island. I understand it's important. It is Korean territory. It comes with fishing rights and mining rights. But there are no lives on that island. The South Korean president to date has said not a single word about North Korean human rights. We briefed a congressional delegation going from this country to South Korea to meet with him. And they asked him, why is your government not taking a stance on human rights in North Korea? And the president of South Korea's answer was, it is a peripheral issue. The rights of 22, now 24 million Koreans, a third of all the Koreans on the planet, is a peripheral issue. Concentration camps, mass starvation, malnutrition, public executions is a peripheral issue. And so generally, you can separate our work, as I mentioned earlier, into advocacy, 3 different categories. The first category is advocacy. We do briefings of governments worldwide. I just met with the Canadians and the French, the European Union. We travel all throughout the world. I was at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And we're trying to exhaust all available diplomatic resources to get this resolved, because we're not advocating war or military intervention. We're advocating saving their lives. Our point is that what's happening in North Korea constitutes crimes against humanity. And it does legally. By the legal definition, it does. A lot of people ask me what makes North Korea different or why we pick North Korea. And it's not because I happen to be Korean. And in fact, I think that there are lots of just and noble causes throughout the world that are happening. We need to get ourselves involved in Darfur. It's 3-4 years too late. We've called it a genocide for years and we haven't done anything. Similar situations are happening in Eastern Europe, in Tibet. Throughout the world, there are minorities being persecuted for no reason besides their race, religion, or political views. And there are lots of crises. Katrina happened in this country. We have epidemics here in this country in South America. And the tsunami, you saw an outpouring of support. The difference between North Korea and all of those situations is that nowhere have I ever seen, and you can say I'm biased, so much of a concentrated, incredible, institutionalized, deliberate human rights violation as in North Korea. There's not a tsunami that we couldn't predict and then we try to react and we fail. It's not a failed state where there's a civil war and 2 warlords are fighting for power. It's not a disease that rampages throughout the society and the government's just too weak to stop it. It's deliberate. They don't need to build these concentration camps. They don't need to publicly execute citizens. They don't need to they have enough food to feed the people. They get huge amounts of aid from all countries in the world. They do not get that food to the people. It's a deliberate, slow motion death. It's deliberately wiping out their own population for political reasons and to stay in power. And that is what makes North Korea so different from everything else. It's entirely 100% man-made. And as a result, if man doesn't do something to stop it, I think it's on our conscience more than a tsunami would be, or a tornado, or an earthquake, or a disease that we could not necessarily stop altogether. North Korea does not need to be doing this in any way. Even strategically, there's no real justification for these human rights violations. But so long as the rest of the world doesn't say anything about it, so long as the United States and China and the European Union and the UN never bring it up, they will continue to do this. And basically, we will not get in there until they've all died. And that's just the fact of the matter. So we continue to do briefings all over the world. We do policy objectives where we push different governments to take refugees in, to talk to the North Koreans about human rights, to help refugees resettle and speak out in public. In terms of awareness, we've had about 100 chapters throughout the world as of last November. We do a lot of mainstream media outreach. We're working on, for example, Hollywood that does movies on North Korea. We push them to make sure they include an element on human rights. We try to get it out there in the common culture so people are talking about it. And in terms of action, as I mentioned before, we have something called Project Safe Haven, which is a network of several dozen underground shelters in China. These are run by 20, 30-year-old something Americans mostly, that go in there, sneak in basically, and they work in the underground hiding refugees. And sometimes you have to move them from shelter to shelter. Sometimes, for example, last year we had a teenage boy, 2 of them actually, that were on a train going to a different shelter because they have to move so they don't arouse suspicion. The conductor asked them for their IDs. They didn't have them, and they got sent back to North Korea. So it's very, very dangerous. We also have projects that feed North Korean children inside North Korea. We feed about 500 a month, obviously without the government knowing that it's us doing it. And we also have something where there's about 15,000 North Korean forced laborers outside of North Korea, in democracies actually, some of them. We have about 11,000 currently in, 3,000 currently in Russia. North Korea owes a huge amount of debt to Russia, but it doesn't have anything to pay it back with. So what they did is they actually sent 3,000 slave laborers to Siberia to cut timber all day long. And they're guarded by North Korean guards. It's essentially a North Korean prison camp colony in Russia. And Russia is a country that the US deals with all the time. Similar things are happening in China, Mongolia, Libya, Madagascar, the Czech Republic, and Poland. There's 15,000 of these workers. And countries like the Czech Republic and Poland are democracies and members of the EU. In fact, we went to the Czech Republic, went on site to find these camps, interviewed the girls. Actually, there were about 372 girls from 18 to 22. We interviewed them, talked to them about their circumstances. They could not leave the embassy. At night, they went to their group housing. They did not get paid. The pay that they received went straight to the embassy. Essentially, they're slaves, essentially. And they're in countries that we have good relations with, as the United States. So we talked to them, and as of last May, they actually shut that down. But there are another 15,000 throughout the world that are waiting for somebody to do something about. And finally, we actually actively run underground railroad operations, myself included, where we will take a group of refugees that's ready and wanting to leave the country to go to South Korea or the United States or anywhere else. Obviously, they have to be at a mental state where they're ready to do so. But if they are, and if we think we can do it without too much risk, there's always risk, but without too much, we go on an operation and we try to get them out of the country. That's what we did in October, and we succeeded in bringing the first 3 North Korean orphans ever into this country. They're now enrolled in American public high schools. One of them is taking hip-hop classes at the Y. I mean, their lives are completely different, completely different. And that shows honestly, how easy it is to make change, because we're not especially trained. We don't have $1 million behind us. We're not agents of any government. We're just amateur grassroots people that are doing this, but it's managed to save lives. And that's kind of one of the points that I want to stress today, is that we need to band around to do this. Similarly, last December, we had the same attempt where there were 6 North Korean refugees that we were trying to get out, and it did not work. It was very effective. We got very far. And at one point, you know in movies where like you rob a bank and it goes ding, and then the SWAT cars pull up and there's like 300 soldiers and guards and everyone? That's literally what happened. And 3 of my activists, including myself, and 6 of our refugees all got arrested and were put in Chinese prison. This isn't to brag about that I've done time and we're hardcore. More so than that, it's the fact that the Chinese government criminalizes helping these refugees, which is a violation of international law and frankly just conscience. It's just wrong to be doing this. And these refugees are sent back by hundreds or 200-300 a week into North Korea, where they face basically certain torture and death. The refugees that were caught with us in December are actually still in prison today. We were released for reasons that are still kind of unclear to us. Other activists that have done the same work, even if they're American citizens, are still in Chinese prisons. Several of them were tortured. One was released last Thanksgiving with syringe marks all over both arms. And he still experiences severe hallucinations at night when he's sleeping. He thinks he's back in prison and starts punching his family members trying to escape. This is a travesty. It's an atrocity. And it's going along for too long without the world paying attention. And if you have any questions about that, we can get into that later, but I'm going to wrap up this presentation. A lot of people say, why are you hurrying this? Why are you trying so hard to make this happen? And my parents in particular say this: why don't you finish going to school, getting a family, making a lot of money, and then do something for the cause? And Langston Hughes once wrote, "I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course, tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread." This is one of the protests that we've done outside of the South Korean UN mission. This is a contrast between the celebration and tears over South Korea not making it to the quarterfinals of the last World Cup in Germany, and the 23 million North Koreans that are suffering as a result of general apathy. And a lot of people say, why are you talking about human rights? You're working against peace. You're going to cause war. You're going to cause destabilization. And there's a quote by the Dalai Lama that addresses this perfectly. It says, peace in the sense of the absence of war is of little value to someone who is dying of hunger or cold. It will not remove the pain of torture inflicted on a prisoner of conscience. It does not comfort those who have lost their loved ones in floods caused by senseless deforestation. And peace can only exist where human rights are respected, where the people are fed, and where individuals and nations are free. And these are diplomats walking right by our demonstrations into their offices. Finally, as long as one dissident is in prison, our freedom will not be true. As long as one child is hungry, our life will be filled with anguish and shame. What all these victims need above all is to know that they are not alone, that we are not forgetting them, that when their voices are stifled, we shall lend them ours, and that while their freedom depends on ours, the quality of our freedom depends on theirs. Our lives no longer belong to us alone. They belong to all those who need us desperately. This is Elie Wiesel. He's actually a Nobel Prize-winning author. And he's actually that guy right there. He is a survivor of Auschwitz camp. He's a Holocaust survivor, very well known. He's actually based out in New York. And his argument is very clear. We are not truly free until everybody is free. And the people that are not free need to know that we are doing something for them. I know this firsthand after what I experienced in December. Being in the prison sucks, especially a Chinese prison. But knowing the fact that people outside knew I was in there and that they were doing something for me, even if it would take 20, 30 years, the fact that they were thinking about it kept me going, frankly. And I wasn't in there for very long. I wasn't there for 10 days, but it wasn't years. Now, there are defectors and refugees and activists that have been there for decades, people that have been born and raised in a concentration camp. These people are assigned numbers, they're taken away of their names, and they're told that they're not even human, that they're dogs, that if you die today, no one will notice. Now, if you're born and raised in that society, I mean, it's an atrocity that we have to account for, that we have to answer for. Finally, there's one last story, and I'm very fond of quotes, so I'm sorry for doing this too long. But you're all familiar with the Good Samaritan story. It's in the Bible. It's part of, I guess, Judeo-Christian culture, where there's a guy that's basically beaten up and lying on the side of the road, and a priest and a Levite walk by him and just kind of look at him and keep going. They don't bother to help him. And then a Good Samaritan, a Samaritan who at the time was not really he was kind of on the marginalized part of society, stopped to help him and, washed him up, gave him a bath, gave him lotion, healing creams, and sent him on his way. And there was a point to that parable was that you should help your neighbor. Martin Luther King talked about this parable but articulated it a little bit differently, and I think it applies here. He said, and it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt that the man on the ground was merely faking, and he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there and lure them for a quick and easy seizure. And so the first question the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? And that's the question many of us ask in the world. If I take my time out for this cause, whether it's North Korea or Darfur or after-school education, if I do this, what will happen to my job, my time, my personal health, my fitness? What will happen? But then the Good Samaritan came by and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? And that's, I think, it's a fundamental difference in how we can think about these situations that will make us actually do a little bit more. The situation in North Korea, I have no doubt one day that these concentration camps will be liberated. I have no doubt one day that North and South Korea may reunify, that we'll be able to take tourist trips. Some of us already have, but wider scale, free access tourist trips to North Korea. Meet North Koreans, have them come over, work here, go to local schools. I know that will happen one day. My question is, how many people will die before we get there? And the direct answer to that is not when Kim Jong-il gives up. It's not when the next US president presses the North Koreans or the Chinese. The answer to that is when we, as a people, as a country, as a culture, stand up and do something about it. And our organization is incredibly small. Right now I have 10 full-timers. For 3 years I had 2 full-timers. Those 10 actually I joined on, I think, 2 months ago. Nobody gets paid. Everybody works pro bono. We have no formal training whatsoever, but we've been able to save countless lives of refugees. We've been able to accomplish a lot diplomatically just because we're talking about it, because nobody else is. And in a democracy like this one, that's all you need is voices and constituents saying, we care about this. But until that happens, these people will continue to be in this situation. And every man is guilty of all the good that he didn't do. Finally, I'm going to show, this is the group of the orphan boys that I mentioned earlier. That's clearly me, and my mom said, why do you even bother? That looks like you. but These are 3 North Korean orphans that are 14, 16, and 17 years old. They are the first ones to come out of North Korea to this country. This one in the middle, when he was 12 years old, he woke up and his mother had just disappeared. His father had already passed away, actually of starvation. His mother just disappeared one morning. About a couple weeks later, his sister disappeared, and all of a sudden he was homeless. His neighbor sold his house, and he was homeless in the streets in North Korea for 3 years, just walking around, selling wood, firewood that he would get on the street. Then one day he said, you know what? Forget this, I'm going to cross over into China. Somehow, as a 15-year-old, he crossed over into China, ended up in our shelters, and last October, we had an underground mission where we were hiding from the police, and we actually brought him out, and now he's here. These are success stories. These are lives that are fundamentally changed, and for him, he can do anything with his life. He can be the next Martin Luther King, he can be a teacher, he can raise his own family. His life is fundamentally changed forever. There are 400,000 more of him hiding in the underground in China with no one to speak out on their behalf. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, our organization website is linkglobal.org. Our blog is zenga.com/linkkorea. If you have personal questions, you can bring up and ask. I have business cards as well. But essentially, what we're asking is not for you to just know about the situation. There's going to be a time, 5, 10, 20 years later, when your kids will come home from school, or your grandkids, and say, Mom and Dad, did you know about this? We just spent a chapter learning about the North Korean human rights crisis. What did you do? And at that point, we won't have the excuse about saying that we didn't know what happened because you just heard me blab on about it for 40 minutes. And the excuse of ignorance will not be there anymore. We have satellite pictures, we have witness testimonies, and the excuse of nobody asked me to do anything won't be there either because I'm asking you now to please help. At that point, I think as a society, as a culture, as a world, we'll have some accounting to do because this is a failure of humanity. This really is. It's a situation where human beings do not need to die, but they are in huge numbers, Even if it was one person dying unjustly, I think it warrants our intervention. But when it's 24 million suffering, when it's 500,000 in prison camps, and when it's hundreds of thousands of refugees being sold on the black market, I think it warrants our immediate attention and action, whether it's politically convenient or not, whether we alienate China and our business interests or the United States and its administration and stability. It does not matter. Ethically, morally, and consciously, in terms of our conscience, this is the right thing to do, is to do something for these people. To close with, I'm going to show a short video clip, about 2 minutes long, of our underground shelters in China, so you can get kind of a visual of what we mean when we talk about shelters in the underground. All the people in this footage are actually still there in the underground in China. We have not yet been able to get them out. And personally, I am banned from China for 5 years, so our underground operations there are on hold for a little while. Can we turn up the sound, please? Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, we're at the Tumen River at the border, China and North Korea.
Is that North Korea right over there? Careful. Detention center built solely to house and jail North Korean refugees before they're sent back. 이건 뭐야?
그게 한국 뛰다 잡힌 것들 사람 취급 안 해준다. 지금 취급만 못 해줘 지금. 그 심한 건 죽이기까지 했다.
몇 살이야, 몇 살? 오.
굶어 죽는 걸 하루가 멀다 하게 주는 사람 봤어요. 잡혀가기만 교회 다녔던 거 아무도 안 되고 한국 가다가 잡혔다 나서 두 가지 다 걸리고 딱 내 자료에 문건을 딱 줘야지.
뭐 하는 거야 지금? 네. 몇 살이야?
몇 살인가 물어봤는데 대답도 없다게.
6살이요. Thank you.
If you'd like to get involved in helping out with this situation, please again check the website, linkglobal.org, and sign up for the listserv. We do have times when we need just literally mass manpower for petitions, advocacy work, and things of that nature. Specific things we need, nobody in the office gets paid, and that's okay. The funding goes directly to our shelters, but you'd be surprised how little we get a month. It's literally a couple grand a month that funds 50 underground shelters, underground operations, briefings with different governments, all of that, which means a little bit more money can make a huge difference and can literally save lives. I had a refugee come to me, and he was about 30 years old. He was very sheepishly looking at me the whole time like he wanted to say something, and he didn't. And I asked someone else with him, does he want to ask me something? And he said, yes. He said he cannot see, he cannot cross the street because he's almost blind, and that he wants to know if I can get him some glasses. So I was like, of course I'll get him glasses. I was thinking lens crafters, 70 bucks. He says it'll cost $4. For years, he could not walk across the street properly without an escort because he couldn't see, because his eyesight was so bad because of a lack of $4. That's the situation that they're in. The refugees that I showed you in their pictures, 14, 16 years old, I asked them, after I got arrested and the 6 refugees are still in prison, obviously I had a moral kind of crisis where I was thinking, is this the right thing to do? 6 people are now in prison because of this. And I asked them, what if you had gotten caught while trying to escape? How would you have felt? Would you have been upset? Would you have regretted it? And he said, one day in America is more than a lifetime in Korea, is more than North Korea, is more than years in China. He said that at any time they would have a little bit of fun and start laughing, they would all of a sudden have to stop themselves for fear of getting reported by the neighbors. That they could not get a good night's sleep because they would wake up with nightmares that Chinese guards had come in to arrest them. That's the reality for these people. So in terms of things we need, if it's in your heart to donate, you can. If you'd like to help out in advocacy, you can. Even specifically with Google, about 80-90% of these concentration camps are just blurs on Google Earth. We cannot see them. And I know that recently in the news there's been announcements with partnerships with nonprofits where you get higher resolution pictures, satellite imagery for some of these sites. For example, in Darfur with the Holocaust Museum. Those are some things we need because we can say, go to this location on Google Earth, but there's nothing there. You can't see anything. And that's a huge tool to promote awareness and engagement from the grassroots. There are lots of specific things like that if you have questions, but I know we're short for time, so maybe we'll take 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll break for lunch. Does anybody have any questions or, yes?
Why is this a bigger deal in South Korea? Why is there that uproar?
Good question. The question is, why is this not, is this mic on? Why is this not a bigger deal in South Korea? Why is there no national uproar? The easiest answer for that is that South Korea likes its economy as it is. It went through some hardship in the 60s and 70s. It had the IMF crisis in the 90s, and now they're actually the 10th largest economy in the world. And their reasoning is, if we harass North Korea about human rights, they will destabilize, they will declare war, they might attack us, or even if they collapse, their refugees will come to South Korea and become basically a huge welfare population. The argument is entirely based on economy and on stability. That's what it is. You would think that South Koreans would be the most active given the fact that they're literally blood brothers and sisters, literally. In fact, some of them came from North Korea in the 60s and immigrated here or to South Korea. But the South Korean government for the last 15 years has clamped down on information to where, believe it or not, after sitting through this, you now know more than average South Korean grad students on this issue. In fact, we had a lecture at the Center for International Studies in South Korea, and they didn't know about concentration camps happening 15 minutes north of them. So that's the situation that the South Korean people are in as well. So I think it's up to the grassroots everywhere else that know about this to do something about it. Any other questions? Okay. Well then, Christine. Thanks.